just not knowing.
So I would like to officially welcome Dr. Mia Cary, one of the most angelic people on this planet and probably on all the other planets also. I believe that. um, Dr. Cary is a 1999 UFCVM grad.
Gator chomp for those that aren't aware.
And she has a personal and professional purpose of activating others to thrive, which she lives out every single day. That is very evident. In addition to speaking, meeting facilitation, association leadership, and customized consulting projects, Dr. Cary reserves a portion of every week for her coaching clients. And again, this is why Dr. Cary is a part of our success call, because we really want our members to have something between a mentor and a coach, right? To get them from point A to point B, that gives us some accountability. So thank you, Dr. Cary, so much for being here. The purpose of this communication session is to provide strategies and resources for managing difficult conversations and helping upset clients and colleagues, which I think we could all use. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Cary.
Awesome. Thank you, Tiara. Thank you so much. Well, it is a pleasure to be here with all of you. And Tiara, I'm not sure, did you say you needed to record this? Because if so, I don't think it's recording.
Oh, yes. So I see a little red light.
Oh, good.
Right? Okay. It's
perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent.
And
awesome.
Then,
go ahead, Tiara. What was that?
I think I gave you permission to share your screen, but let me know if you need anything.
Yeah, I see it. And I do have a few slides that I'll use as the backdrop of our conversation. And depending on how many may join us as we go, we may go into breakouts, or if we stay this size, we'll do some of the breakouts together in the main room. And let me go ahead and share my slides. And I am happy to send you all a copy of the slides if you would like. I've built into them a couple of videos that I'll share as we go. And that way you'll have access to everything. There's two of my kitties. Let's see here. Let me get these up for us. And then I will share with you our game plan for our time together. Let's see. Let me get this up. And then if you guys can give me a thumbs up, are you able to see my slides? Yeah. All right. Excellent. So I'm Mia, as Tiara said, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And tonight we're going to talk about radically candid communication. And I'm going to be sharing with you a communication model that I came across several years ago, and I use it everywhere. And I hope you find it as useful as I do. So our game plan for tonight, share a little bit about my background, and then we're going to, as Tiara said, talk about communication, specifically this radical candor model. We'll get into some scenarios. Instead of breakouts, we may stay together here as one group, and then we'll talk about a feedback model. And then what I'm going to encourage you to do, and I do this for all of my workshops. So you know how so often the time we go to, whether it's an in-person program or a virtual webinar, and we hear some stuff and some of it resonates and some of it doesn't, right? That's normal. But we think, ooh, this, there's a piece of it that's really good. And then you go about the rest of your day and you forget and you don't do anything with it, right? I've done it. I do it all the time. So what I encourage us to do is, as we're going through this content together, try to think about one thing you're going to do based on either what we talk about, or maybe it's not even something that I share. Maybe it's something that you hear from a colleague that you're like, ooh, that's good. Or maybe it's one of the resources that I'm going to share that you'll follow up on. So that's what that one smart thing is. What's one thing you're going to do based on what we talk about tonight? And then I'll share a bunch of resources with you. In terms of the font that you'll see as we go through these slides, I try to use Open Dyslexic font. If you've not heard of that, it's a free font that's out there that increases readability for those readers with dyslexia. So I encourage you to check that out if you haven't seen it. And a little bit about me. There's my fam. We're based in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I like to show this first picture, and then this second one is the real us. A little crazy but fun. I have spent my undergrad at Murray State University, and then before veterinary school, Tiara shared that I went to University of Florida for my vet school. I was actually a marine mammal researcher for 6 years before vet school. I spent 3 years in Alaska working on bowhead whales, spent time in the Dominican Republic working on humpback whales, and learned a ton in what I think of as the research phase of my career, but was ready for a next step. And that's what brought me to University of Florida. And I think of this as my clinical phase of my career. I spent time working before and during vet school as a technician, and then after vet school as a small animal vet. And in the middle here are some of my classmates in 2019. We were on our 20th reunion trip in the DR. And then after my clinical phase, I spent about 15 years in industry. So I spent 5 years at Novartis Animal Health and 9 years at Boehringer Ingelheim in a lot of different roles: sales, marketing, technical support, education, a lot of time in training and strategic planning, and then also executive leadership. And again, as with all of us, right, we learn so much, and then, sometimes we're ready for the next thing. And my next phase was an association phase. I spent 3.5 years leading the educational initiatives for the NAVC, and also a 1.5 years doing the same for the AVMA. And again, met some awesome people, learned a lot, and I decided 2 years ago that I wanted to go out on my own. So for 2 years, actually the 2-year anniversary is coming up next week, I've led Cary Consulting, and which has allowed me to work with a lot of different people and clients, and actually a lot of my former employers I still do work with. And I'm also CEO of the Pride Veterinary Medical Community. So that's just a little bit of my background. And then I also want to share that because I'm based here in Greensboro, North Carolina, I like to share this land acknowledgement. I acknowledge the Eno, Saponi, and Shakori nations on whose land I live and work, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. And if a land acknowledgement is new to you, there's a link there for more information, but it's basically a formal statement that recognizes the relationship that exists between Indigenous people and their traditional land. And so out of respect, I like to share this. And hi, Zoe. I'm glad Zoe is back with our presentation. Disclosures and disclaimers, there isn't any conflict with the content that I'm sharing, but just out of best practices, I show that. And now I'd love to learn a little bit about you. I know there's only a couple of us on right at the moment, but I have a polling system that I like to use. So I'm going to go ahead and tee it up. And so I'll ask you if you want to grab your phone and open up a browser, like open up Google Chrome, or if you want to open up one on your computer. And then let me toggle over to the Menti, and I will give you the code. So what you will type in is menti.com. You can see it at the very top of the screen, menti.com. And then there's a code there. And I'll read off the code in case it's too small to read on the screen. It's 6994-2077. And this is, keeping it real. How are we doing? We talked a little bit about this before we got started, but one word that describes how you're feeling right now. And then as you type those in, they'll come up on the screen. Okay. So again, if you go to menti.com, and then type in 6994-2077, and then type in your one word that describes how you're feeling. And I like what I'm seeing, the radical candor. We've got excited and fatigued, content, overstimulated. Oh, is that too much caffeine? I can relate to that. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you being candid with how you're feeling. Hopefully, those that are fatigued, maybe we'll learn some tools that'll help invigorate you. Maybe not. Maybe it'll just be time to go to bed when we're done. But I appreciate your candor. One more poll, and then we'll go back to the slides. And that is, if you had to think of one superpower, and we all have multiple superpowers, those things that we're super good at or that we enjoy doing, what would you say is one of your superpowers? And if you just, have that URL open, you should be able to it'll go to the next slide, and then you can type in your superpower. And I share this poll, one, to get to know people, get to know the folks that I'm working with, and also to serve as a reminder that even if we're fatigued or tired or overstimulated, that there's cool stuff that we do and can bring to our world. And sometimes we need to take a moment out of our day and remind ourselves of that. So we have making connections, empathy, connecting people, and creativity. Awesome. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Ooh, perseverance. These are excellent superpowers. So remember that as we go into some of this content that we'll be sharing, is playing to our strengths is such an important of a gift that we can give ourselves. Ooh, patience. That's one I don't have, but I want to have. I'm working on it slowly but surely. Awesome. So thank you all for sharing that. All right. Wait, somebody said Kimba. Is that Kimba Marshall out there? I don't see her, but if she's out there, hello. Okay. So now
no, I was just saying that I peeped her in one of your photos. From
oh, yes, she was. Yes, down in our reunion trip. Yes. Yeah. Yay. So now this is a reminder, again, as we're working through some of this content, think about the one, you probably all seen that acronym SMART. You know, when we're thinking about SMART goals, we want them to be specific, so we know when we've done them, measurable, attainable, and relevant, right? If they're not relevant to what matters most to us, then, you know, don't make it a goal. And then time bound. So for example, say one of the videos that I'm going to share, you're like, oh, that's a good video. I want to take it and share it with my team at work or my family. When are you going to do it by? Are you going to do it within a week? Are you going to do it by the 1st of next month? Just try to make it time bound. And that's the very last thing we'll do together, is hear what all of our one things are. And you can stop me at any time. Sometimes I don't open the chat just because it toggles the slides when I'm showing a video, but no, at any time you can unmute, ask a question, or put it in the chat, and I'll try to look at the chat too. The reason we picked communication for our theme tonight, because it's key to so much of what we do, right? I mean, I am convinced that anytime you're dealing with a challenge, any kind of challenge, that communication is typically part of the problem. It may not be the entire issue, but it's almost always part of the problem and part of the solution. And so it's such an important attribute to hone in on. And an important part, and I think a key of communication, is empathy. And we already learned from the poll that one of us already has the superpower of empathy. So what I want to do, just to reinforce empathy, is we'll just take a couple minutes and show a short video. And it's by Brene Brown. You're probably familiar with her work in empathy and resilience and vulnerability. But it's just a great and in some ways funny description of empathy to remind us what it is and why it's important. So what I'll do is I'm going to start the video and then I'll pause it, because what I've learned is that no matter how I have the audio set, for some of you it's going to be too loud and some of you it's going to be too soft. So that'll give you a minute to toggle your audio, and then I'll start it over again. So I'm pausing there just so you can toggle your audio. And now I'm going to play it through, and it's about just 2.5 minutes long.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, woo, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So that is Brene Brown on empathy. And I love that video for a variety of reasons. And it's such good reminders, right? And I even though I provide these workshops, I try to walk the talk. There are so many times that I fall into that default of trying to solve a problem versus just listening to the other person. And it ties into this communication model, because you'll see one of the quadrants is ruinous empathy, and it's kind of when empathy goes wrong. So this is the model, and Kim Scott is the author of the book Radical Candor, and she actually just came out with a new book called Just Work, which is really cool. But we'll focus today on this model. So you can see there's two axes to this communication model. One is caring personally, and the other is challenging directly. And all of the research that she's done fuels the idea of this model that if we can do both when we're communicating, it is the best way to tackle and challenge and solve problems. And as we'll see when we watch her explain the different quadrants with her coaches, it is so easy to fall into the other quadrants. And I'll encourage you, when you hear Kim talking about the different quadrants, try to think about times when you've maybe fallen into all the different quadrants. So you recognize for yourself how easy it is to maybe not do it the right way, but then also once you're aware of it and keep it front of mind and stay intentional with it, that it can really solve a lot of issues. So what I've teed up next is a short video. This one I think is a little longer than the last one. It's about 5 minutes long, or 4.5 minutes long, but it's Kim and some of her coaches explaining the model, and then we'll break it down together. So again, I'll just start it so you can check your audio, and then I'll start it again so that we can watch it together. So that's the audio. Again, if you need to turn yours up or down, and now we'll play it through.
We want to help you have better relationships at work and do the best work of your lives.
One of the biggest problems is that people don't give each other enough impromptu, in-person feedback. Praise can feel patronizing, and criticism can feel downright mean.
Often when people give feedback, they're not as clear or helpful as they intend to be.
And so we developed a framework called Radical Candor to help you build a culture of good feedback.
Nobody starts out their career thinking, I don't give a damn about people, so I'm going to be a great boss. And yet, when we're about 18, we get told to be professional. And too often this gets translated as leave your humanity, the very best part of yourself, at home.
When you're 18 months old, just about the time you're learning to talk, your parents teach you, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. But now as a manager, it's your job to say it.
Radical candor is just caring personally and challenging directly. And yet it's really hard. In order to do it well, you have to undo training that's been instilled in you since you were 18 years old and 18 months old.
We've made it easier for you to give radically candid feedback by being really clear about what happens when you don't. And everyone's got stories like that.
And I just didn't like the guy. And so finally, he was in the middle of another disquisition about how much we should give up. And I banged the table and I said, dude, shut up. You just talk too freaking much. So the effect was, the CEO who I was mentoring couldn't look me in the eye. I'd potentially torpedoed his company. The person we were negotiating with was deeply offended and left the room. The meeting blew up.
At the request of our bosses, Peter and I get into a room and we start to apologize. I go first. I apologize and I don't mean it. Worse, Peter knows I don't mean it. And just to keep it nice and ridiculous, I know Peter knows that I don't mean it. And so there we are, insincerely apologizing and insincerely accepting these insincere apologies. What the hell is the matter with us?
But then this interesting thing starts happening. She would come to me all the time saying, oh, I'm so frustrated about our boss. He wants this and that, and I don't think it's the right direction. I disagree with him totally. And I would empathize with her. I'd say, oh, I know he can be frustrating sometimes. And the interesting thing was on the other side, my boss was doing the same thing. He was coming to me complaining about my friend. I would empathize with him, but I, again, would never challenge him. And the reality of this is I became this shuttle diplomat, going from one to the other, listening to what they had to say, but never telling them, you know what, just go talk to each other. Get me out of the middle of this. Eventually, we had to fire my friend.
And I'm standing there with my heart in my throat, and this man standing next to me at the red light says, I can see you really love that dog. That was all he had to do to move up on the care personally axis. Just a few words. I looked at him and nodded, and he said, but you're gonna kill that dog if you don't teach it to sit. Now he had my full attention. And then he just points at the sidewalk in this sort of harsh gesture, and he says, sit. Belvedere sat. I didn't even know she knew how to do that. I sort of looked at the man in amazement, and he says, it's not mean, it's clear. The light changed, he walked off, leaving me with words to live by.
Radical candor really means say what you think.
Just say what you think.
Say what you think.
Just say it. Just say it.
So that's the model by some of the coaches. The shuttle diplomat. Yeah, I'm just looking through the comments. Yeah, it's interesting. Some of these resonate more with me than others, depending on my mood and the kind of day that I've had when I watch this video. And for me, it's interesting. I can get to the point. I'm a very direct communicator, and I also think of myself as a very caring person. But I can see myself falling into the being too direct sometimes, and I'm just trying to get things done. And kind of some background with this model, what happens, what it leads to if we're not careful. So for the first one, if we're speaking with someone and, that first example that he gave where he's challenging directly, but there's really no care, what that's going to lead to is the other person being defensive, right? And so no matter what we're trying to accomplish, you're not going to get anywhere because you put that other person on defense. Now that other quadrant, manipulative insincerity, so where we don't care, nor are we speaking directly, that's going to lead to mistrust because the other person can just feel the vibes, right? You don't care, you're just trying to get something done. So there'll be no change in behaviors because there's no trust being built. Ruinous empathy, this is a tough one. I think, especially, I see this a lot in the veterinary profession, and none of these behaviors equal a bad person. It's just someone that's having, a hard time communicating in one particular instance. The reason I see this a lot in our profession is that we do care so much, right? We care so much sometimes that it can be destabilizing, and we don't go to that next step to really confronting some of the challenges that we need to confront. And again, with this one, there can be no change in behaviors because of ignorance, meaning if we see an issue and we don't directly communicate it, well, the other person may not even know that there's a problem. They may be blind to it if we don't bring it to their attention. And then the ideal, if we can get in the habit more so of doing it, of speaking directly while still caring about the situation, about ourselves, about the other person, this is where we can see profound growth and change because we're all engaged in the same conversation. And again, even though this model in some ways seems so simple and straightforward, it's not always super easy, and it is super easy to default sometimes to some of these other ways of communicating. So what I thought I'd do is I'd give you a couple of examples, and then I'll show one more example from another radical candor coach, and then we'll try it out ourselves. So in this particular one, let's say that we have an upset colleague, and the colleague comes and says, you know what, I overheard you giving incorrect information to a client, and they're really upset. And so if we, bring our little model back, and I'll pull up all 4 quadrants, and I'll just share some example. So here's one example of handling this in an obnoxious, aggressive way. You have got to be kidding. You telling me I made a mistake, right? I mean, one, it's rude and you're being an arse, but you're saying directly the issue is, but you don't care. You don't care at all. So the next one, an example of manipulative insincerity is, oh gosh, thank you so much for letting me know. I'm going to get right on that. Not right. And again, it sounds like such a jerky thing, and the person is being such a jerk and answering that way. But yet, I mean, I can think of a time that I've almost answered that way. And it's when I'm not at my best self, right? I'm tired, I'm exhausted. I've been dealing all day with various things, and I'm not bringing my best self forward. That happens. So the next example, again, you've got this colleague who's saying, there's an upset client because you gave information that's incorrect, and you answer with ruinous empathy. And that would be nodding in understanding. And you're so upset that you actually gave incorrect information that you can't bring yourself to ask the colleague, well, so tell me, what is it? And that's, again, I see that happen a lot. And it's an amiable type of approach where you really don't want to hurt the person and you don't want to cause more harm. And then you're not able to move the communication forward. And just an example of how to handle this with radical candor, which you would all probably do, which is simply like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for letting me know. Let me know what you overheard. I want to fix it. Let's figure this out together, right? And easy to do when we're in a good, fresh frame of mind, when we've had a good day, or maybe it's the beginning of our day. That's probably how we will default. But knowing this model can help us when we get in the, not so good frame of mind. So I'll share one more example before we hear from Lily. So in this situation, say it's a frustrated client, and she says, look, I don't want to take my cat to the back. And it happens to be the current policy in your clinic because of COVID-19 that all pets go back to the treatment area for their exam. So how do you handle it? The first one, if you are obnoxious, aggressively handling it, you would say, look, either you give me the cat to take care of the back, or you can take your cat to another clinic. And I've heard that phrase been said before. And we get to the point where we want to say that, right? Because it's like, are you kidding me? We dealt with all of these clients today. Some of them are wonderful, some of them are not. They're stressed, we're stressed. So you could see yourself saying that, and maybe you've even said something similar. But what does it accomplish, right? Does it really move things forward? It doesn't. And we know that when we're in a good frame of mind. So in a manipulative, insincere way to handle that situation is, after the client tells you that, you just turn around, head to the back, where you tell a colleague, you're not going to believe what Mrs. Smith just said. So then you're not even talking to the client. You're not even dealing with the situation. It's being manipulative because nothing's getting done. And then the ruinous empathy, similar to the last one, is you nod and you say on the download to the client, I get it. I wouldn't want to take my cat to the back either. And you leave it there. And you may really feel that way. You may really be empathetic and understand that, it'd be so much better to stay with your pet, but you're not solving or addressing or directly communicating and dealing with the situation at hand. And then the last way, which again, in this simple example may seem obvious, but it really explains the radical candor approach to this, is I understand, right? I agree. In the ideal world, your pet would stay right here with you. Because of the COVID-19 restrictions, to do the exam, we've got to go in the back. So let me do that. And I promise I will fill you in on everything we do and say as soon as I get back. That would be one way. Or another way, my personal favorite, and Sharice is going to like this, is that you tie in virtual care and you say, we get it. So we're going to actually put on a video of what we're doing in the back so you can see and hear everything that's happening. So a lot of different ways to handle this in a really direct, caring, compassionate way. So those are some examples just to help reinforce these different quadrants. This last, let me get here. Whoops, there we go. This is Lily Mason, and she is another radical candor coach. And I asked her to share her 4 different examples of personal stories that exemplify these different quadrants. And the first 2, she's going to tell us which quadrant which she's describing. And then I'm going to see if we can guess the last 2. And each one is like a minute or 2. And then I'll pause in between them. So let's hear directly from Lily. First of all, I think her first one is obnoxious aggression, but she'll tell us.
So in 2010, when I was in graduate school, my internship involved me being intern to the program director of a private school. And as my duties included helping her with creating programs, I came up with a lot of great programming ideas, and she loved them. She loved them so much that she wanted me to meet with the principal and share some of these ideas in hopes that I could potentially get a job at the school next year. I was so honored that she felt like that. Well, I should also say at this time, I was also doing poetry very heavy around the community in which my school was in. And on the day of our meeting, I came to school dressed, again, this is 2010, in a graphic tee, a denim mini skirt, but it also had like black lace ruffles going around the skirt, and some black fishnet stockings and some magenta Rockstar boots. I attended the meeting. The principal loved it. He actually wanted to implement quite a few of my ideas. As the meeting was ending, as the meeting ended, I was leaving and I ran into the director and she said, "Hey, did you have your meeting yet? How did it go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just had it. It went great." And she was like, "Oh, really?" And she had like this very like confused look. She was flummoxed even, I'll say that, on her face. And she said to me, "Okay, well, come in earlier tomorrow and tell me about it." And I was like, "Okay." And I went on and I went and did my performance. The poetry was fantastic. I felt like a rock star because I was dressed like one. So I get to school the next morning early, like she asked me to. And I walk into the class. The door's open. There's a seat right in front of her. She motions for me to sit down like she's like a real boss. And she was. So I sat down and she was like, "So tell me about the meeting." And I was like, "It was so great. He loved this, all the things you said that he would be interested in." She was like, and how are you feeling? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. How are you doing?" She was like, "Okay." And then she said that, okay, she got up and slowly walked to the door and closed it even slower. Like it was a mafia movie or something. And then she turned to me, and her eyes, like the glimmer in her eyes, the glimmer rather, got so bright and intense. And she said, "Don't you ever come to know me and dress the way I saw you dressed yesterday. If you want to be taken serious, you need to dress seriously. And you thinking, we want you to get another job here next year. How can somebody even want to take you serious like that?" And I was like, "Oh, I forgot to tell you that I had a performance yesterday." And that's why I was dressed like that. I didn't have time to change from the performance for the performance after the meeting. And she was like, "Oh my goodness. Okay, I was so worried about you. And I just really, really know that you have so much potential. And I don't ever want you to jeopardize that. We have to be taken seriously because the odds are stacked against us. And I'm telling you this because I care about you, because I love you." And I was so honored that she took the time out to tell me that. She talked to me just like any other Black mama would talk to their child. And she was definitely an older Black woman that I admired. And she was right. I mean, in the workplace, Black women, we have to show up 10 times harder, and she didn't want me to jeopardize that. So I knew that that was radical candor because she cared personally and challenged me directly.
I love her first example because when she first tells the story, I think it's going to be obnoxious aggression when it's like get all up in her face. And then I love that she points out and we all see, I'm like, oh my God, that was caring. That was the deepest kind of caring to just address the issue with her. So that's her first example, radical candor. Here's her second story that she'll share to exemplify another one of these quadrants.
2012, I was a high school teacher, and I loved my students dearly, but sometimes they just would not listen. Well, on this particular day, I gave out the instructions, and a student, after I gave out the instructions, was not listening. And she just, she says, "What did you say we're doing?" And I said, "I just said that this is what's happening." And my voice was very just like stern and just, kind of boisterous. And it hurt her feelings to the point she was like, "Well, you didn't have to yell at me. I was just asking a question." And I realized that it got in the way of what I was actually trying to teach her because I was being very obnoxiously aggressive and I didn't get the result of the lesson being maintained in her mind. So I had to go and apologize, and then I had to re-explain and operate with grace.
Another good one, and we probably can relate to that. We have probably all done that, and afterward you're like, oh. But I like how she said at the end, well, two things. One, it actually created more work for her, right, to have to go back and solve it. But I love how she said to go back and operate with grace and apologize and move forward. So this next one, she's going to share and not tell us which of the quadrants it is. So I'll pause after the next one, and I'll encourage you to either in the chat say which one that you think it is, or you can come off mute. And again, I put the quadrant up here so you can remind yourselves, but try to see if you can guess which quadrant she's operating in the one that she explains next.
As a coordinator, doing community events was a really big thing, and I needed to get approval for a building within the community in order for us to do this particular event. Well, the director of the building was not super fond of our organization as well as me, I suppose, but I didn't care about that. I just needed the building, so I kind of let him vent, say whatever he needed, and was just like, oh, okay, yeah, thank you. So do we get the building? And he was like, yeah. And I just kept it moving because I didn't care. I just needed the building. And it didn't help the organization's working relationship because I didn't go back and pretty much say like what his issues were and things like that. But I also stopped working for them.
So what do you think? What do you think that one was? Any guesses? Anyone? Anyone? Wait, let me go to the chat. I see a guess in the chat. Yes, yes. Manipulative insincerity. Yes. So she, didn't communicate directly with that individual, and she even said, she goes, I didn't care, right? And it didn't go as smoothly, and there was probably negative consequences for the organization down the road. So that was an example of manipulative insincerity, and sometimes it's hard to tell. Let's listen to her last one and see if it jumps out at you.
I had got a new job and I was excited about that new job coming up. As a coordinator, one of my jobs required me to do a lot of teamwork, project work with my coworkers. And I had a coworker who could just seem very inept when it came to fulfilling her role of the project. But we were friends outside of work, and I knew the type of personal challenges she was dealing with. So because it was my project, I had to tell her that she wasn't pulling her weight the way that she should have. And she began to just, sob and cry and say, all that I'm going through. And I felt so bad. So I just ended up taking on all of her work in addition to, managing the project that we were doing, coordinating the project that we were doing. And when it came time to present, we all got the accolades for it. And she really didn't contribute anything, but then got put on another project and ended up getting written up because she wasn't pulling her weight over there either. And I again felt bad because I'm like, had I stuck to my guns and really like pushed her to move forward, she wouldn't have had those consequences.
So guesses on what that last example was? Yes, exactly. Ruinous empathy. Part of it was obvious because it's the one that she didn't do yet, but also because, she really explained that she didn't want to hurt her feelings, right? And how many times have we said that, right? It's like, oh, I just didn't want to hurt her feelings. And hopefully this model will help us to, maybe think twice before we don't communicate, because it actually is going to be able to move things forward for not only that person that needs to hear and needs us to communicate directly with, but also for ourselves. So I'd like us to spend a little bit of time kind of digesting this model and seeing what makes sense for us. So Tiara, in just a second, I'm going to ask you to put the group, since we've got now a bit of a quorum, into 2 breakout groups. And let me tee up the assignment. So the situation that I'll ask you to talk about in your breakout group is, let me pull it up on the screen. Okay, you are at a work luncheon. So this is the hypothetical scenario. You're at a work luncheon, and as a colleague that you just met leaves the table, you notice he has a huge broccoli chunk stuck in his tooth. And so this picture is supposed to exemplify 2 people, they're happy, they've met, it's the end of the lunch, and they're getting ready to leave. And you see that the other person has this huge broccoli chunk. So in the breakout rooms, introduce yourselves, hopefully you'll meet some new folks, share where you are today and where you grew up, just as a way of getting to know each other. And then try to, as a group, come up with one response for each of those 4 categories. So you can see the 4 categories here, but how would someone respond to that with radical candor, with obnoxious aggression, etc.? And just play around with it as a group. And when we come back together, I'll see if anyone wants to share how it went, kind of what you talked about. If you want to take a quick picture of the screen right now, and that way you can see the assignment, and you can take it with you into the breakout. Any questions before we go into the breakout? Okay. All right. So we'll just do it for about 5 minutes. Tiara, if you can put 5-minute breakouts, 2 groups. And then if anybody needs anything when you're in the breakout, just put it in the chat and I will come and happy to answer any questions.
All right. So I'm going to throw you guys into
8:20.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, how much ever time you need is totally fine. And if it's less than 8:20, that's totally fine too.
Okay. Okay. I have, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. So how did it go? Was it easy? Was it hard? Anybody want to share how it went in the breakout? One brave soul. Come on.
Oh, this is Kim Riley. We found it very difficult. We thought the, identifying which one I think was the toughest, the ruinous empathy. Like, I'm still not really sure of what that looks like with the broccoli and the teeth.
Oh, gotcha. Good. Okay. So did anyone in the other group come up with a good one with ruinous empathy for the broccoli and the teeth example?
We did, sort of not saying anything and just being like, oh man, that really sucks. I don't want to embarrass them, and like noticing it, but really like not acting at all.
Yeah, that's perfect. And it is a tough one. It is a tough one, but I think that describes it to a nutshell, because you're caring. You really don't want to hurt that other person's feeling. And I've been there, right? It's like, or like somebody with their fly down and you're like, oh God, this is going to be awkward, but I'm just not even going to touch that. I want to, but yeah, the poor soul's walking around all day with the fly open, or the broccoli in the teeth, or pick your topic, right? Great. That was an awesome example.
I also feel like maybe saying, doing the whole like passive kind of thing where you say, man, I really hate it when I get like broccoli stuck in my teeth, and you're doing like the whole like,
yes.
and they're just like not getting it.
Exactly. Such a good examples, and you can relate to that because it's real world, right?
Yeah.
So let's try something different. So let's take it. This is going to be even harder. Okay. So in this next breakout, I've tried to create. Well, I actually asked people currently in practice, what are some real scenarios that you've had to deal with? And what I'd like you to do in this next breakout, and we'll just do this knowing that we'd like to we'll end before 8:20 if you guys can stay with us till then. But in this breakout, take turns playing the person just trying to attempt responding with radical candor. And there's 4 different scenarios here. And when you get into breakout, find out when your birthdays are in the year, and the person with the birthday earliest in the year. So like the January 1, if there's a January 1 baby, you would go first, and then so on. And then each one of you try to tackle one of these scenarios. And so the first one is a client asks you to do something that's unethical. The second one is you enforce a regulation with the client, and the client is super upset and asks to speak to your supervisor. The third is you must tell a kitten foster parent that her kitten's quality of life has declined to the state that the kitten cannot be adopted and most likely will need to be euthanized. One of you may recognize that because you gave it to me as a scenario. And then the fourth one is you notice a fellow veterinary associate is repeatedly doing tasks that the technician staff are capable of and qualified to do. How do you handle it? How do you respond with radical candor? So just take turns in your breakout trying to answer each one. And we'll spend another 5 minutes in this breakout. You may not get to all of them. Do you have any questions before we go into this last breakout? Okay, no worry. I see that a couple folks have to step out. No worries. We'll have the recording for you. Okay, so let's do this one here again for 5 minutes. If we can do 2 breakout groups, and then we'll come back together and see how it went. Excellent. So how did the breakout conversation go? Anybody want to share? Was it hard? Was it easy? Did you come up with good, radical, candid answers? Who'd like to share?
Our room was the best room.
Self-proclaimed best room. I love it.
Agreed. I agree.
So how did the conversation go?
It was really good. Yeah, I mean, I think that we had a nice spread. So we've got specialist representation, we've got non-clinical, and we have the vet student. And so both
Nice.
Noya and I both have different viewpoints of this is what it looks like practicing. And then to have the vet student view there of, I'm not sure of how I get to that point of being able to say the buck stops here, right? So
Right.
yeah, I thought it was a really good, it was a nice spread of experience to be able to have the conversation.
Excellent. Excellent. Did you by any chance get to scenario 3 and come up with a good way to radically handle that one? Yeah.
Yep.
You want to share?
That was mine.
Okay.
So this is Nanya. I'm a cardiologist. So this is kind of the world that I live in, not necessarily specifically, but in terms of dealing with end of life coming a lot sooner than the owner or caregiver is anticipating. And so I sort of threw in the caveat that, like, if this was, like, say, a kitten with right to left shunting disease that is going to die young, like from the moment it was diagnosed, I would be radically, candor at that point and be like, look, this is a situation. We're not dealing with making this animal better. We are looking at fatal disease. We're looking at ending life sooner. And right now we're looking at trying to maintain a quality of life for as long as possible. So by the time we got to this scenario, I would have already set the stage for this is going to happen sooner than we're expecting. And it would just be a matter of turning towards, like, okay. And then my question is, like, are there only 2 options or 3 options? Because the 3 potential options I see are rehome, which is not an option. Foster becomes permanent home, knowing the situation, or euthanasia. Like, is this animal, like, no longer fit to, is quality of life so bad that it needs to be euthanized today? And I went with option A, that there are 3 options. So basically said, we've talked about this, you fought the good fight, you've been doing everything you can, you've been doing everything right, but life sucks and this disease really sucks. And we're at the point where I cannot ethically recommend that this animal is rehomed. We cannot, like, shunt this on some unknowing pet owner that's thinking that they're going to get a kitten and they're ending up getting a sick animal the entire life. But if you want to keep, or for its short life, if you want to keep it and keep doing what we're doing, that's great. But right now we need to start talking about end of life, quality of life endpoints, at what point we're going to stop, because we're looking at it and approaching that in the near, like, weeks or months.
Wow. That was
So I'd already made them cry terribly. They're going to cry again, but at least the shock is not there.
Right. I love it. I mean, that was radical candor perfection, because you even 2 of the things you said was that, done everything that you've done. You acknowledge that, man, you put in the work. We've tried everything we can. This is just the reality we're dealing with. And it's not joyous, but it's our reality, right? That's so awesome. Well handled. It sounds like that's a normal day for you. So, yeah, I do this every day. It's what I have to deal with.
This is the lake I swim in. Cardiac disease is usually fatal. We don't get many happy endings in the end.
Right. Well, and taking that, right? So you're so accustomed to handling that particular situation with radical candor. There may be some other situations that come up kind of out of the blue. Like, oh, this is a new one before. All right, radical candor, right? I'm going to care deeply, but by God, I'm going to challenge and communicate directly, because that's the best way that I can do the right thing by this vet or this client. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, with our being cognizant of time, I'm not going to do the last breakout because I want us to end on time, and I respect your time and your evening, but I wanted to just share with you, so you have it for later, this feedback model. What we were going to do is look at the feedback model and then use it in the last breakout. But this is a super simple feedback model that I was first exposed to by Jen Brandt at the AVMA. It's WWWEBY, what's working well, what could be even better yet. And tying this feedback model with radical candor is a great way to create a culture where feedback is really viewed as a gift, and that it's welcome and it's appreciated. So I would just encourage you to think about this feedback model, think about how you could potentially incorporate it into your work culture, your home culture. And it's just a great way of always setting up the expectation that, well, I want feedback and I want it to be comfortable that I can also share feedback with you. So that's the feedback model. And again, we were going to tie it together into a breakout, but we'll skip this breakout so that we can end on time. But I would like to make you aware of these resources, and I'm going to send Tiara these slides as soon as we're done, and she will be posting the slides so you have them. And these are all hyperlinked. So if you, for example, like one of those videos you wanted to share at your workplace, you're welcome to anything that I've shared tonight. And your one thing before we close out. I would love to hear from you all. If there is one thing that you're going to do based on either maybe it's something I shared or something you heard from a new friend or colleague in a breakout, one thing that you commit to yourself to do based on what we talked about today. And if you want to either, I have a poll for it, but just for time, if you want to share it in the chat or just say it out loud before we end, that would be awesome.
I'm an older child, Mia. I'm just going to say it.
Good. What you got?
Oldest. So for me, actually, it was not necessarily the content, which was all fantastic. One of the things that I'm going to take with me and make sure that I have at the top of my mind is to use the dyslexia font.
Wonderful.
I really love that, and I think that that's a really great way of connecting, and so that's definitely something I'll be taking with me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cherise. I love that. Any other one things that folks would like to share?
So this might sound a little bit self-serving, but so veterinarians tend to be introverted people, and so and I'm obviously a little bit of an extrovert, and so it turns out that I'm kind of in a lot of ways, not perfectly, but I am doing a lot of radical candor, and like for example, telling puppy owners that their dogs are going to die because they have severe subaortic stenosis. Like my goal, and I would tell students, like, if these owners aren't crying by the time they leave the room, then they're not getting it and they need to get it. And my resident mate used to like laugh at me. She was like, "Oh, you're so mean," And so it's kind of nice to be like, okay, there is a point to this. Like, it felt right to me, and there actually is like, some belief behind it. And so that was nice. And also the dyslexia font. I do love that because I do a lot of presentations.
Wonderful. Excellent. I love both of them. Thank you. Anyone else want to share before we close out on one thing? Anyone?
I definitely learned a lot from the room I was in. So thank you, doctors. I'm going to practice to try and be more direct. So yeah, that's what I learned.
Love it. Wonderful. And is it Tavia? Is that how we pronounce?
Tavia.
Tavia, thank you. So, and remember, when you're being direct, it's because you care, right? You care about the other person. You care about what you're talking about. You care about yourself, right? So that helps reinforce why it's okay to be direct in our communication. Well done. Awesome. Anyone else? Anyone? All right. Well, I appreciate all of you so much for investing time in yourself. That's awesome, right? I'm such a firm believer that self-care and servant leadership are not mutually exclusive. We have to put ourselves first and take care of ourselves and grow so that we can then help those that we want to help in the world around us. So thank you for being here. And my email is here on the slide, miacarydvm@gmail.com. If I can do anything for you, let me know. And again, we'll make sure we get these slides out to everyone so that you have them at your fingertips. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Mia. That was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wish I could have been on sooner.
No worries. I hope everything's okay.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Cary. And like she said, these slides will be available on Workplace, and this recording will also be available on Workplace. So if you did miss the first part of it, you can go back and watch it.
Awesome. Well, have a good evening, everyone, and take care. Hope to see you again.